I don't remember ever saying that before. Now you guys know it's being recorded. Okay. All right. Chumash. So let's start off as we usually do. I want to talk about Parshat HaShavua, the weekly Torah portion. Balot Neirot. This week was Naso, so this week is Bahalot Neirot. We are continuing with discussions a little bit about the tabernacle, usage of it. And so Bahalotcha begins with a command from God to Moses to tell Aaron how to light the lamps in the Mishkan, the tabernacle. And later on, that was continued in the temple. You know, as a lot of moderns point out, the temple itself, the inner sanctuary part of the temple, in the wilderness, you had the Mishkan, the tent, and that was divided between the holy part and with a curtain in the middle. And behind that was the Holy of Holies where the ark was. Similarly, in both the first and second temples, you had the outer section and the inner section, the Holy and the Holy of Holies. And the outer section was where the regular Kohanim could go. The inner section, the Holy of Holies, where the high priest went on Yom Kippur and performed the ritual. There in the first temple, that's where the ark was supposed to have been kept. But one can understand the sanctuary in some ways like a house for God. In many ways, that's the way it was seen. You have a lighting the tabernacle, the menorah. You had a table for the showbread, they called it. You had incense that was burned. All those were common things in the ancient world in a king's palace, in the home of the king. And God is said to be enthroned on top of the cherubim that are on top of the ark with the tablets. So that's part of what was the vision of what the temple was like. Right? And so we're told how Moses is told by God to purify the Levites, and we've talked about some of their labors. We continue with that, and the different duties that the Levites were to perform. Then we're told about the actual erecting of the tabernacle. Interestingly enough, the rabbis always looking very closely at wording, talk about Moses setting up the tabernacle. That was the language we're given. Now, of course, we moderns would say that means, he's in charge. But they took it literally that Moses himself did all the work, that he alone set up the tabernacle. And we're told about making other instruments. There were silver instruments that were, used. There were horns or trumpets that were used, and they were more important in many ways than the shofarot was at that time. And we're told about how Israel traveled, and a very famous passage that we recite when we open the ark is found in this section. These are a number of different things that we have. And then also Moses assembles 70 elders to serve as judges for the people. And at the very end, we have a very strange story of how Miriam and Aaron complains to something about Moses. It's not clear what their complaint really is. And the Torah goes out of its way to say that Moses was a very humble man, and there's really no reason for Miriam and Aaron to give him a hard time, but that they did that. And so they are punished for their challenge of Moses. And that's where we end the Torah portion. about Miriam being forgiven and being cured of the leprosy that she was struck with as a result, as punishment for speaking badly about Moses. It's interesting to note, and certainly those with the feminist agenda always question, why is it that Miriam was punished, but nothing happens to Aaron? The ladies get the brunt of it here and not the men. I have no answer that there's a good answer, but it's open to all kinds of interpretation, and I leave that to others better than I am to come up. All right, so everybody is here now, and sorry about that, I hit the wrong thing, but anyway, all right. Okay, close the chat. Okay. Tonight, we're going to talk about mysticism. I think I entitled When Philosophy is Not Enough. And part of the popularity of mysticism in Jewish circles was indeed a reaction to the rationalistic philosophy of Maimonides and others. But the mystical side, the idea of trying to experience God directly, is old in Jewish tradition. It's not a relatively modern creation. It was part and parcel of Jewish life. And we know that there are references to mystical approaches amongst the rabbis of the Talmudic age, of the Mishnah. The idea to experience God directly, that is what is called mysticism. Okay? And one of the realities of the modern world was there's a very negative attitude at the beginning of the 20th century in Jewish circles, modernistic circles, Reform, some of the more Western influenced leadership, to downplay mysticism as being superstitions. And it's fascinating to show you the difference. There was a work called the Jewish Encyclopedia. You can actually find it online now for free. That was written in the early 1900s. And mostly by very modern scholars. And there's very little about mysticism and Kabbalah in it. However, if you look at Jewish Encyclopedia Judaica, which was written in the early 70s, and it's been reissued, a new version of it, and that you can't get for free, that they cost plenty. It's like 10 times as much or even more material covering mysticism, because the authors of that work had no problems with mysticism. Famously, I just saw this misquoted by somebody else. It's not clear by whom and about whom this was made. So the legend that I got it, which doesn't mean it's correct, was one of the great modern scholars of mysticism, Gershom Scholem, gave a series of lectures that was eventually made into a book by him about mysticism. And he was introduced by Professor Lieberman of the seminary, that nonsense is nonsense, but the study about nonsense is science, or something along those lines. Right? But that's been said about many different versions of that story. Okay? So, but that shows a certain kind of attitude that did exist and does exist in certain circles towards mysticism. Somebody's was making lots of noise there a second. Okay, what's going on? All right. So when we think of mysticism today, we generally don't think about the historical mysticism of the rabbinic era. What was known as the Heichal mysticism, or the Merkava mysticism. That centered around two ideas. One was the vision of Ezekiel, Yechezkel, of the chariot of God, the opening part of Yechezkel, where he has this vision this fantastic vision in the first chapters of his book. And so they sought to understand the full meaning of that from a mystical perspective. And that was known as Merkava mysticism. Merkava means chariot. And that was seen as a chariot of God. For those who are interested, the word Merkava, chariot, is also the nomenclature used for Israeli tanks today. It's called a Merkava. Okay. The other was the palace of God. And they would have mystical visions of what God's palace, just like when I was talking about the temple before, right? How they envision that to be. And there's a very famous story found in the Talmud, the Talmudic sources, that talks about Arba Shenichnesu Pardes. So there were 4 scholars, rabbis, who entered into the Pardes. Rabbi Akiva, Ben Zoma, Ben Azai, and Elisha ben Avuya. And whoops, all right. So anyway, it ends up that of the 4, only Rabbi Akiva came out of this vision unharmed. Ben Zoma, I think it was the one they say he went insane. Ben Azai committed suicide, and Elisha ben Avuya became an apostate. You know, they have this circle, they enter into this mystical realm, and only Rabbi Akiva was able to contemplate it and come out without being injured in some way. So that suggests a very ancient aspect of Jewish mysticism. Similarly, Shimon Bar Yochai, there are a number of stories in rabbinic literature about him and his sons and certain mystical experiences. Though Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai or Shimon ben Yochai figures prominently in a work called the Zohar. The Zohar is not part of this early mysticism. And indeed, one of the important medieval figures, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachmanides, was also very important mystical scholar. And his commentary on the Torah has many mystical allusions, and he sometimes makes references to secrets that he can't reveal. But in the work called the Zohar, which is a commentary on the Torah. I was trying, what was the date on the Zohar? Trying to remember. The Zohar, the Book of Splendor, is a commentary on the 5 books of Moses. It is written in a very difficult Aramaic. It's not even Hebrew, it's Aramaic. And it is purported to be the teachings of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. By the way, you know that this tragedy they just had in Israel a few weeks ago at Meron, where they go to, that's supposed to be the grave of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. That's where they go. Okay. So anyway, it's supposed to be a work that he had written. Now, most modern scholars, and by the way, also some older scholarship, I came across an interesting fact that one of their medieval rabbis, a few generations after the Zohar came to the front, also was of this opinion that it was not written by Shimon Bar Yochai, that it was not an old text, but it was actually written by Moses de Leon, who is the person who popularized it. He is the one who said he found the book. He is the one who popularized it and had it printed, etc. Well, brought to the fore. And indeed, certain elements of it, according to modern scholarship, could not date back to the time of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. For example, there is an attempt to interpret a word for synagogue, esnoga, all right, which the Zohar says is a combination of the word esh, fire, and noga, and light. So a synagogue is a place of light, esnoga. Well, the problem is esnoga actually is a Portuguese word, which means synagogue. Esnoga, synagoga. Okay, so it's highly doubtful that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, I don't have the source where that comes from, just has this reference, or the rabbis of his era would have known Portuguese for the name of the synagogue and then would turn it into a Hebrew word. And there are other examples as well. That does not mean that the Zohar was created de novo by Moses de Leon, even if he was the author of it. Certainly many of the ideas that are found in it are very old ideas going back to the Talmudic era. But the fact that it was so really written by Shimon Bar Yochai, that's highly doubtful. But that becomes the most important work of formulating modern Kabbalah. The word Kabbalah that is usually translated today as mystical approach to Judaism really means simply chain of tradition, to lekabel, to receive. As a matter of fact, Pirkei Avot, Ethics of the Fathers, opens up with the words Moshe kibel Torah miSinai. Moses received the Torah from Sinai, or at Sinai. Received Torah at Sinai, it really should be. All right, so now, and the word kibel is the same root word for Kabbalah. So that is the real meaning of it. But when we say Kabbalah today, we're talking generally of Jewish mysticism. And one of the early important thinkers and popularizers of mysticism as it became later on was Rabbi Moses Cordovero, who was born in 1522 and died in 1570. And he was in Sfat. You know, in northern Israel, in the Galilee, there's a city called Sfat, which is considered to be the mystical city, the center of mysticism, because at that time, in the 16th century, it was a center for mystics. The mystics gathered together. And one of the important elements of this is that most of them were Sephardim. They came from Sephardic backgrounds. And so either 1492 was when the expulsion of Spain took place. So they lived not long after that event took place, right? Cordovero was born 30 years, right? 1492, so he was born 30 years after the expulsion from Spain. And, you know, when we look at modern Judaism, and especially in the Ashkenazic world, we can't help but feel still the impact of the Holocaust. And that affects Jewish theology and how people speak when they're doing theology. They can't speak about theology without referencing the Holocaust. Well, similarly, the Jewish world, especially the Sephardic world, for the next 100 years or so, could not really speak theologically without taking note of the expulsion from Spain or the impact of that expulsion. And an idea, Cordovero makes use of it, other mystics make use of it, and it dates back to early rabbinic Judaism, is the idea that while God is one and indivisible, sometimes God is referred to as the Shekhinah. The Shekhinah is the indwelling presence of God. It was the Shekhinah who was in the tabernacle. It was God who condensed himself, as it were, to be able to be in the tabernacle to speak to Moshe. And he did that through a process called tzimtzum, of contraction. Remember that word because we're going to see it used differently in a couple of minutes. But Shekhinah is also a feminine word. And so sometimes, just like we talk about Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh is God, and Elohim is God, and the rabbis talk about Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh representing God's aspects of mercy, while Elohim represents God's aspects of strict law, din. Similarly, there's a bifurcation between the male elements of God as Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, and the more female elements of God found in the Shekhinah. And so one of the mystical ideas was to reunite those two aspects of God, or to see them being reunited. Indeed, Lecha Dodi that we recite on Friday night may be a reference really to the Shekhinah coming back to her, in quotes, big quotes, to her husband. So God in early rabbinic literature was said to have gone into exile with Israel when Israel was exiled, the first time and the second time. And similarly, many of these Sfardim saw their experience of exile from Spain being reflected in the early exiles and being reflected in God himself being torn apart from where he was to where, to where they were, this exile existence. So that certainly was underpinning of a lot of Sephardic thought and theology came to be. Good night. Okay. You want to say good night to everybody? So just wave. No. Okay. Don't wave. They wave to you. He does the same thing in my Talmud class on Tuesday nights. And indeed, one of the famous aspects of mysticism that usually gets people excited a little bit, it was a mystical practice to imitate. Well, in Judaism, we talk about imitation of God. And many religions do, other religions do too. One of the things that the mystics talked about, this attempt to reunify the male and female aspects of the divine. And how do you represent that? As coitus, as sexual relations. And it was a mystical practice for a husband and wife to have relations at midnight on Friday night as part of the attempt to reconnect the two elements or the two aspects as they appear to people. Not that they're really separate and distinct, but it was the way they experienced aspects of God. And borders on, we can get into problems when we go that direction, but that is part of the mystical vision. And part of that is because for the mystics, well, we'll compare it to Maimonides. Maimonides, the rationalist, following in the footsteps of the rationalist philosophers like Aristotle, tried to remove any kind of anthropomorphic vision of God as it can be. And without going into the whole thing, I've just actually been reading a little bit about the Maimonides and Aristotle lately. For Aristotle, God has no contact with the world, has no need to have contact with the world, and is totally separate and distinct from the world as we know it. And Maimonides has to deal with that in his attempt to Aristotelianize Judaism. But clearly, Maimonides would say, when we pray, when we do something, we do it because we're commanded by God, but our actions have no effect upon the divine. Because if the divine is perfect, the divine is lacking nothing. If it lacks nothing, that's why it can't want anything, or that's why it can't change. That's why prayer cannot influence the divine. Right? And again, Maimonides has to deal with that in his understanding how prayer may make a difference. But for Cordovero and mysticism, it's not the case. The case is that what we do has effect upon the divine. The Kadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, praised be, he gave humanity, gave human beings the ability to influence him. And when we imitate God by our actions, we move God. And we influence through those actions the overflow of the divine love into the world. And as is developed, and I'll say, go into more details in a minute, by Isaac Luria, the Ari Kodesh, when we perform a mitzvah, what we do is not only fulfill God's word, but also we influence the commander. We influence the divine. So it becomes more than simply obeying God, it becomes helping God. And indeed, as Lurie does it, in the act of performance of mitzvot, we release the divine sparks, that I'll explain in a minute, to rise back up to God. Now, Isaac Luria was one of the members of that community in Sfat later on in life. He was born in 1534 and he died in 1572. Cordovero was much older, but he dies 2 years before the Ari, as he's called, Ashkenazi Rabbi Yitzchak, as he's usually referred to. You'll hear him all the time, especially in religious circles, as the Arizal or Arizal. Ari means Ashkenazi, Rabbi Yitzchak, Rabbi Yitzchak Ashkenazi, which means his family at some point in time come from Europe, not Ashkenazi background. Zal, may his memory be for a blessing. So it would be often would be written A-R-I-Z-L or Z double apostrophe L. Okay? He died very young, but he was around Cordovero and he liked a lot of what Cordovero said, but he also created his own vision of what Kabbalah should be. And that's what most people, when they think of Kabbalah, is what they're thinking of today. By the way, when I'm talking about Kabbalah, I am not talking about the Kabbalah of Madonna and her groups. There is a what they call the Kabbalah Center. I think we still have one, I think, here in Toronto. And it is a popularization of Kabbalah, but it is in some of the actual teachings may come from Kabbalah, but it's more of a not just a sect, a cult in some ways, than a true expression of Kabbalah. All right, so anyway, I'm going to now give you a synopsis of Lurianic Kabbalah. It's not exact. It may be wrong in certain places, but this is how I've received it or understood it to be. Right? So now we're going to go back to before the Big Bang. It's fascinating, by the way. The Kabbalah and the Big Bang, in Lurianic Kabbalah anyway, have this in common. Before there is a creation, there's nothing. Right? Contrary to Aristotle, the universe is not eternal. The universe has a beginning. Now, the problem for both the philosophers and the mystics to a certain extent is how can the infinite, because God by definition is infinite, or in Hebrew, the Ein Sof, without end, how can the infinite even come in contact with the finite? How can such a thing happen? And Neoplatonism, from which Kabbalah derives this idea, talks about emanation, something emanation from God, rather than God himself coming directly in contact. Now, these are all metaphors. It doesn't mean to be taken literally, at least I don't believe so, to explain the process of creation. Okay, so now, before there is creation, all there is the Ein Sof, God himself. And before God can create, God must make a void in himself in order to make room for creation. The example I always use is a fish tank. If you have a fish tank and it's filled completely with water, and you want to put one of those little bubbling castles inside to get oxygen for the fish you're going to put in later on, if the water is all the way to the top, right, what's going to happen when you put that little castle in? The water's going to spill out. Right? You got a mess. Now, though, expand the walls. 8 walls, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all right, 6 walls, right? Get it right? Expand those sides ad infinitum. That's the Ein Sof. Where are you going to put the universe? There's no way to spill out. So in order to create the physical universe, God has to make a emptiness that he then can fill with creation. Which, and you know, if you think of one explanation of evil is the absence of God, the first act needed for creation is the absence of God. So evil may come to existence, very existence, before the world itself comes into existence. All right, so now we have this void, which is meaningless in our imagination. And into that emanates a ray of God, light, as it were. Because the first thing God creates, according to the Torah, Yomer Elohim, Eor, God said, let there be light. So this light emanates from the divine. It's not the divine itself. It's not God himself, but an emanation from the divine, which now is going to create the world. And this world that was going to be created, according to Luria, can be defined as a series of sfirot, the 10 sfirot. The 10 sfirot are aspects of the divine. That's that, you know, sometimes you will see a diagram. That was one of the things I was looking for, but I couldn't because my computer crashed on me. But if you look up Kabbalah or Jewish mysticism, you will often find that there will be a Kabbalistic drawing. Let's see if I can call one up real fast right now. Kabbalah. Now, let's see. I'm going to move you here. Oh, that didn't help because I want to share it. Sorry, guys. All right. Yeah, well, let me, come on, I can do this. Share screen, there we go. What happened to it? Why isn't that on my, all righty. It's not gonna happen. Sorry. Anyway, it's a pattern of what the Kabbalists refer to as the idea of what God is all about. And it's not that God is these things. This tree of life imagery of God starts off at the top as the Keter, the crown of God. Then there's Chokhmah, which is wisdom, and then Bina, which is understanding. And then again, coming down from Bina, again, I never sent you the other form that, yeah, it looks like you got it there. Yeah, that's exactly what we're talking about, Kasia. So there are these 10 sfirot, and they bought that idea of sfirot goes back to ancient history. They talk about the sfirot of the world, how the world was all formed. That's not unique to Judaism. But each one of these 10 items is an aspect of God, and they interrelate with each other in all kinds of ways. All right. So now the original concept, according to Luria, was that the light that was emanating from God was to go through the 10 sfirot. And one by one, the emanations are supposed to come out from God through the 10 sfirot. But something happens, a catastrophe. And for some reason, some flaw, maybe the absence of God in the universe that he's creating, the sfirot shatter. You have to think, you have to think of them as if they were actual physical entities. Like when I talk about mysticism, and we see it is as if it were. That's an important phrase to use. As if this were the case, as if it were, just like as if God had a male side and a female side. And the sfirot have physical being, and they have spiritual being, as it were. So something happens, and the sfirot, at least some of the sfirot, shatter. And the shards, which in Hebrew are klipot, which means like shells, klipa is a shell of a nut, the klipot fall. And as they fall, some of them capture sparks of that divine light. Okay? So now, what is God going to do? God creates human beings in order to rectify that catastrophe. And Adam and Eve are given a command not to eat of the tree of life, of dots, the tree of knowledge. Had they followed that commandment, everything would have been put back the way it's supposed to be. But they didn't. Instead, they committed an avera, a sin. And therefore, we live in the world not the way God originally intended the world to be, the world of klipot, of the shattered particles of the sfirot, the divine figure, which is also sometimes called Adam Kadmon, the first primordial man. It's another name for that structure. All right. So now we live in this world with the klipot. And what the Torah, what God then does, by giving Israel the Torah, creates the capacity for restoration, tikkun olam, the restoring of the world that was originally meant to be. That way, that's the word, when you hear the phrase tikkun olam, which is used a lot today for meaning making the world a better place, often in terms of social action. The original meaning of tikkun olam was a very mystical idea about literally restoring the world to the way God meant it to be. Repairing the world. So what happens? When we perform a mitzvah with the right attitude, we are capable of raising up some of the sparks that are caught in the klipot and returning it to God or to the Godhead. That's how it's supposed to be. Conversely, when we sin, we allow sparks to be caught. So we can raise up the klipot to let the sparks out, or we take the klipot and allow them to capture more sparks. So it's a constant struggle between good and evil in terms of what's going on in the world. You still with me? Yes.
One question. So up to here, I'm okay. When we sin, you said it goes even deeper. And when we do mitzvahs, it goes even higher, goes up.
Right.
Is that pertaining to Jews and Gentiles, or no conversation?
I don't know. I'm acting out of, but rabbinic tradition is that everybody has certain basic mitzvot. Sheva mitzvot b'nei Noach, the 7 commandments of humanity. That's what it means by b'nei Noach, humanity. And I would suggest that it is true for non-Jews as well. But since they don't have the secret knowledge of the Kabbalistic ways of doing things, maybe they're hindered in that thing. Because see, what happens is in many prayer books that were influenced by these ideas, and the Art Scroll has them in it. I think I'm trying to remember what. Do I have it here? I don't know if the Koran Siddur has it. I don't think the Koran Siddur has it in there. Let me just, this is Haggadah. Well, in the Haggadah, they don't have it. I don't think they have it in this prayer book. It may. You often will find in a lot of traditional prayer books, before we perform mitzvahs, that we are prepared to perform the positive commandment of God in order to reunite Yud-Hey with the Vav-Hey, the Shechina and the Kadosh Baruch Hu, different kinds of. In other words, you take this statement, you concentrate. Kavanah means to have concentration on something, to get your mind set that what you're about to do is a mitzvah, and the mitzvah, you're performing it for the sake of reuniting the elements of God. So when you do the mitzvah now, you've said the kavanah. Let's say with the lulav. So I say, here I'm about to perform the mitzvah with the lulav. I'm sure he has in this one because he's got a lot of Kabbalistic stuff in here. Let's see. Say go on Shabbat, Shachar Shabbat, Shachar Shabbat. All right, find it. Let's see. All right, so in this Siddur, it has before the lulav, it says, he writes them, it may before the will, before you, Lord God, my God, and God of my ancestors, it's singular. With the fruit of the Eitz Pri Hadar, the etrog and the lulav and the myrtle and the hadassim, the names of your names, the letters of your name are reunited, bringing together one to the other. They will become one in my hand, to know how your name is recited over me and those who see me bringing it together. And when I shake them, it will influence the overflow of blessings from the Most High knowledge, from the seat of the palace, the home of God. And may be considered before you the mitzvah of the four species, as if I have fulfilled with all of its designated aspects, and the 613 mitzvot that are dependent upon it, because it is my intent to reunite the name of the Kadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, praised be He, and His divine presence together and with mercy, and to unify the name of the Yud Hey with the Vav Hey in complete unity. In the name of all of Israel, Amen. Praise the Lord God, Amen, Amen. Right? So now when I go say the bracha for the lulav and then I wave the lulav, I know what I'm doing. Unlike the non-mystics who take it and say, all right, here's the time. It's time to bench the lulav and etrog. I take the lulav and etrog. I say the bracha and I wave them in accordance with the mitzvah. I'm not saying one is better than the other. I'm not a mystic. I don't say the hineni muchan mezuman paragraph. But that was what underlies the Kabbalistic notion of how you perform mitzvot. And so we, therefore, in the performance mitzvot, we follow God's command, as I said earlier, like Cordovero said. We similarly influence God, so we're trying to reunite the elements of God, as it were, into the ultimate unity that is supposed to be. And that is the basic cosmology and the basic understanding of how the mitzvot fit in with this Kabbalistic notion of restoring the world. Right? Now, that, that's just the relationship of the different sefirot and how they influence each other. That's a very complex idea, and indeed, some of the things that I have read talk about a series of worlds, where the bottom of the 10 sefirot now become the top of the next 10 sefirot. And there's a raising up and down. And you can raise things up and you can bring things down. That's tied in with the mitzvah of releasing the sparks. And that's also become part and parcel of understanding the role of the human soul after death. It's very common in Orthodox circles to say to somebody, let's say I say Kaddish for their parent. They might say them, may this Kaddish or this act that you're doing, you're sponsoring a Kiddush. May the soul have an aliyah. May the soul go up higher as a result of your performance of this mitzvah. And that's tied in with this Kabbalistic notion as well. Mm-hmm. Now, there was the Kabbalah takes greater formulation in the 16th century. Hasidism begins not long after that. The Hasidic movement is highly influenced by Kabbalistic ideas. And one of the things that happens is a greater popularization of these mystical concepts. And not the great depth of that Luria is talking about them, but on a certain level, and that becomes very impactful throughout the Jewish world. especially in Eastern Europe and in the Sephardic communities, to such an extent that many of the traditional prayers have extra lines or things added to them as a result of Isaac Lurie, the Ari, his suggestion, and that of his followers who took his suggestion. They added bits and pieces to some of the daily prayers. Sometimes that was simply taking over from what the Sephardim did, and some went so far as to use that to create what we call in today the Nusach Sfard. You know, if you go into Orthodox synagogues, there are two in the Ashkenazic world. There are two family of prayer books. There is Nusach Ashkenaz, which is built upon the traditional liturgy going back through to Germany. And then there's what we call Nusach Sfard, which is influenced by the Kabbalah and the Kabbalistic ideas, which is essentially an Ashkenazic prayer book, but influenced by a number of practices that come from the Sephardic prayer book, the Sephardic world. And therefore, some words are added to that liturgy. The order of some of the prayers is a little different because of that liturgy. And so that is the prayer book of the Hasidim, but is also the prayer book that you will find in many non-Hasidic Orthodox synagogues. One has to know what the style of davening is in the particular synagogues, whether they're Nusach Ashkenaz or they're Nusach Sfard. Now, that's not meaning, and then there's, of course, the Sephardim and the Dot HaMizrach, the Syrian, Iraqi Jews from that part of the world, whose Siddur is different altogether. Again, the same common prayers as we have in the Ashkenazic tradition, but their Siddur is very different in many ways. Now, as I said, Kabbalah was highly influential in the Hasidic movement. It was popularized amongst the Hasidim, and it was also found amongst many scholars who were not Hasidim. The Vilna Gaon, for example, one of the important he was alive at the time of the creation of the Hasidic movement. He was amongst those who opposed its creation, but he too was a scholar of mystical traditions. So mysticism is not limited to the Sephardic world or to the Hasidic world. Indeed, it was part and parcel of much of the Ashkenazi world. But now there are two aspects to mysticism, and one of those is called, one idea behind it is an intellectual speculation of the Kabbalah, and it's intellectual, right? What's the relationship between different sefirot? How do our acts on earth influence the divine? You know, it's a way, in a sense, it is a counter to philosophy. It's a theology built on a mystical way of seeing the world, contrasted to the philosophical, intellectual approach to Judaism. But there's also what is called practical Kabbalah. And practical Kabbalah, since we can affect God, if we know how to use certain divine names, write them in amulets, perform certain actions, we now enter into the world of magic and superstition. And so the Kabbalists themselves want to draw a distinction between what they called white magic and black magic. but many others did not make that distinction. So like I met, was it last week, someone asked me about the stories about Jesus, right, and the divine name. Well, that is part and parcel of the Kabbalistic tradition, and that it predates Kabbalah, but they make use of that idea that when you know that other divine names, and there are all kinds of, in the mystical tradition, numerous kinds of names that are thought to be the name of God. You have the Yud He Vav He, you have Elohim, you have the Yud He Vav He is usually referred to as Tetragrammaton, the 4-letter name of God, but there's also said to be a 42-letter name of God, and other kinds of things that are there. Now, one of the big influences that we still have from Kabbalah is the Kabbalat Shabbat. It's not called Kabbalat Shabbat because Kabbalah, but that circle in Tzfat of mystics are the ones who formulated the way we have it today. One of the important hymns, Lecha Dodi, was composed by one of the circle in Tzfat. Yosef Karo, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, was amongst that community. And he claimed indeed to be visited by a spirit that helped him understand what Jewish law is supposed to be. Some rabbis over the course of the century sometimes interpreted a decision in Jewish law based upon the Zohar or other mystical ideas. So it's there in many different forms. But as I said, in the West, especially with the rise of modernity, with the rise of the Wissenschaft, like we talked last week, with other aspects of the modern world, the Enlightenment, frowned upon this mystical tradition. And as I said, that's why we find that it was thought to be unimportant, and even sometimes, like I said, frowned upon in those circles. Now, one of the things, and I alluded to it earlier, because of this idea that there was power in Kabbalistic knowledge, there were Christians who were interested in this Kabbalistic tradition. And you have creation of a Christian Kabbalah. And then you have the modern versions of it, as in the Kabbalah centers, which take it away from its foundations. In rabbinic tradition, you weren't even supposed to study mysticism until you're 40 years of age. And in order to study mysticism, you had to already have accomplished a great command of Talmudic knowledge. And you certainly had to be a practitioner of Jewish law, of the mitzvot. As I said, one of the essential aspects of Kabbalah is how it understands the usage of the mitzvot to formulate the influence upon God. So it's tied in very much to Jewish tradition and practice. In the Hasidic world, there was still that element that was there. But in the modern world, there are people who want to have the cake without the calories. That came to my mind just now, right? They want the Kabbalah, they don't want the underpinnings of it. They like the mystical ideas, the red threads, to ward off the evil eye. The Hamsa, the hands sign that you'll find on walls with Kabbalistic inscriptions on it. They don't see a contradiction between practicing Kabbalah and eating treif. I mean, the mystics, the true Kabbalists, would be aghast at what takes place in this. But because of the modern proclivities that we have today, There is a desire, an honest desire, to become more spiritual, to see the world in a more mystical way of dealing with the world, to see forces and powers in the world that are not simply visible to the human eye. And that certainly is all part and parcel of the Kabbalistic vision of the world. And so in a lot of modern Jewish circles, introduction of at least a kind of proto-Kabbalistic idea has come about. And those are not necessarily bad things. Many non-Orthodox religious communities have introduced Hasidic ideas and teachings, Kabbalistic ideas and teachings into their approach to Judaism. And they put it in their formulation of what they understand Judaism to be. The Kabbalah Center, that kind of a place, is just popularizing the Kabbalistic ideas, but bifurcating it really from Jewish tradition altogether. And that's why you have to be very careful when you're looking at things and trying to understand Kabbalah, what your source of information is. And it's studied today both by practitioners of Kabbalah, those whose totally religious vision of the world is that way. It's also studied and used by modern scholars who may be influenced by the Kabbalistic constructs, but certainly do not have that theology completely part of their vision of the world. One of the most important translations of the Zohar, English translation Zohar, is just been finished by Danny Matt, a fellow I knew from ancient history, who has put out a fairly well-received English translation, giving some notes and things on the Zohar in a readable English from a scholarly point of view. He's not a Kabbalist in that sense. Arthur Green, I may have mentioned him, is also a very important student of mysticism and also a very liberal Jewish thinker. So you have all those things going on today as well. But if you're interested in Kabbalah, you have to know it's a very deep pit or eddy. I don't know any what a metaphor you want to use. To really understand it takes a lot of very hard work, and I don't claim to understand it. I just wanted to give you a basic idea. When you say Hebrew Kabbalah, I don't know what you mean by Hebrew Kabbalah. When I say Kabbalah, I'm talking about the Kabbalah that's part of Jewish tradition, mysticism. Okay? And
that's the one I'm referring to, because I know there's, like you mentioned, there's also the Christian version of it, and there's also all kinds of other versions of it.
Yeah,
right?
well, see, it becomes popular because magic, magic is popular to lots of people. They think you can do things. And so I don't know anything at all about Christian Kabbalah. I do know that obviously they are not going to be practitioners of Judaism. But one of the elements of Kabbalah and mysticism that I have problems with is much easier for Christians. Because if you think of the Sefirot, now you have to explain how the Sefirot are just aspects of the one God. Or when you talk about the Kadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, praised be He, and His Shekhinah, the feminine aspect, how they're really just metaphors. They're not meant to be distinct distinct entities, because God is only one. Well, that's hard for many of us. Now, if you're a Christian and believe in the Trinity, You're already used to that kind of juggling of understanding the divine in different ways from what I would consider absolute monotheism. To talk about the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit being one and the same and being separate, and however it's done in the theologies that of the various Christian denominations, you've already into that kind of explanatory world.
I think if I can maybe jump on board here, Rabbi, the idea of Trinity, I think in Christianity is a little bit, well, completely different, only because to me, Jesus was a human,
Well,
but then God, but then human. As we're in this, it's just the feminine and masculine part.
I'm not trying to defend or denigrate or anything. Judaism is always, traditionally, Judaism has had a great deal of difficulty with the Christian Trinity concept of seeing it as being truly monotheistic. Okay, and the incarnation of God into the presence of the human. And I know different Christian groups have different ways of understanding all of that. Right? But the point being, at the heart of Christianity is this Trinity that you have to deal with. So therefore, to talk about the Sefirot and seeing those as aspects of God, you have the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. So, you multiply it by 3 and add 1, and you got 10 Sefirot. I mean, again, that's maybe not fair, but, I'm just saying, because me personally, from my own perspective, I have difficulties with that. I'm sure Maimonides would have a heart attack over this. But the mystics have claimed that Maimonides is really a mystic. And this could fit in with him. Don't ask me how. I have no way of doing that, of understanding how it could be possible. But that's, that is the reality there. But there is power to it. Oh, Tzimtzum. Okay. Now, you remember when I talked about God being in the tabernacle, what did I say? God had Tzimtzum. The divine presence was kind of shrunken in together, compressed, so that God, who is infinite and everywhere, could be present in the tabernacle. Okay? What's the big deal? If God is everywhere, well, what do you mean he's present in the tabernacle? He's present in the tabernacle. He's present in my bathroom. If God is everywhere and all, everything. But so now the Kabbalists, though, the Lurian Kabbalah takes that vision and turns it on its head. See, for the original idea of Tzimtzum, God was compacted, at least for moments in time, when he speaks to Israel from the tent, to Moshe from over the cherubim in the Ark of the Covenant. He kind of shrinks himself all into it. He's Tzimtzum, to come together, to shrink in. The Kabbalists say, in order for us to create the world, which is nothing but God, who is everywhere, the Ein Sof, his Tzimtzum for them is not concentration, but elimination. He shrinks into himself to create a gulf. So it's Tzimtzum, but it's Tzimtzum turned on its head. Follow?
That would explain, in the beginning, there was nothing.
Exactly.
Right?
Right. And when you think about modern cosmology, the Big Bang, and you think about Lurianic Kabbalah, based upon the Jewish tradition of Yesh Me'ayin, something from nothing, what is the Big Bang except the explosion of light and matter, the creation, as cosmologists today believe the universe came into being? That fits in perfectly with this Kabbalistic vision. Because after all, if the universe was infinitesimally tzimtzumed into itself, if that's what it was, if there's one vision of it, it says it goes back and forth. One cosmology says there's enough matter in the world that it expands and then it retreats, expands and then it retreats. Okay. And then there's another school of cosmology says, no, it was a one-time event and it's expanding. It will never come back together. But that certainly works with this Kabbalistic idea, especially the idea that if you say it's not eternal back and forth, there was nothing there. And what was there? What was there before the universe? If you're a divine, if you believe in God, you believe in the divine, well, then obviously all there was God. And when the universe comes into being, in order for the universe to come, there has to be retraction of God, retracting into himself rather than concentrating into himself. That's a better way of saying it. Tzimtzum means to shrink into, but it just depends which way it's going. It's going that way or it's going this way. Right? So the universe does, and if the idea that the universe has enough matter in it that someday it's going to turn back and go back into itself, maybe there won't be another universe. On the other hand, there's a rabbinic tradition that suggests that God created several worlds before he created this one. And this was just the last of them, or the latest of them. So maybe that's the answer to the ultimate meaning. I don't know. Right? But it has its beauty. It has its weaknesses, and certainly it is still part and parcel, without any question, in Jewish life and world. And so, and for the rationalists amongst us, not so much. But even I like the idea of making the mitzvot something more than merely the act. And, it's theologically, I'm not so sure about it. After all, my image of God is not some human being that we can influence that way. But on the other hand, who knows? I don't know. And also, one of the things that is pointed out by Louis Jacobs, the reference in mystical language is Ein Sof, the infinite. And we can't know what that is. There's no way we can comprehend the God himself. All we can comprehend is what God has done and made. And that way is very similar to Maimonides as well. We can't really know in some aspects of it, but we can't know the divine. We can only know that which the divine has done and created, and the echoes of that creation. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have one more regular class, and then we have an exam. Okay?
Rabbi,
Yes.
mind if we ask a question?
Of course, I hate it. I hate questions.
All right. Well, Paul was asking about how Kabbalah is like just in generally seeped its way into Judaism. And like, I guess in my family, like my grandma has like a million like hamsas and in the house, and we break the glass cup in the weddings. I think that's about the shattered light too.
No,
Unrelated.
that's already goes back to the Talmud.
That's how did we?
It's a Talmud. The Talmud speaks about an episode in which the rabbis were celebrating something and was getting very joyous, and so the maid or somebody threw a pot and shattered it, and when it broke, it startled everybody and then kind of calmed down a little bit. So to remind us, when we're celebrating and having joy, that there's a limit to where it should go.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Okay, well,
I mean,
to ask how
that doesn't mean it wasn't reinterpreted later on to be reference to the breaking of the Sefirot.
Our main question though is how is Kabbalah like manifested in perhaps your life? If you could tell us. You say you don't practice it, but how does it show up anyway?
Well, first of all, let's say I always daven the Friday night service, Kabbalah Shabbat service, which does have its origins in Kabbalistic circles. and I'm sure some of my practices that I do, traditions that I have Kabbalistic origins without me necessarily knowing them. You know, lots of people have different traditions and things that they do. Other than intellectual curiosity, Kabbalah has not had a major impact in my life. I have done some reading on it, and I keep, you know, I do read on it, and I wish in some ways I could be, in the sense of that theology of the Kabbalah. I wish I could reach over to that theology to make it mine, but I can't. I'm too much of a rationalist. I'm too much of a modern, and I'm not into the mystical, that thinking there's powers and forces around us all the time that we can't see. You know, when I read the Talmud and it talks about demons and things like that, what I see are, you know, ancient beliefs that were not, well, essentially they were superstitions. People didn't know. They didn't know about the world as we know it, and they needed some kind of way of identifying things that happened, and so goblins and demons and what have you came to fore. I mean, we call them germs and viruses. So, you know, maybe there is a commonality that way, but they understood it as being truly forces that were out there. I don't believe in that. That certainly is part of Kabbalah, the idea that there are forces out there. They speak of the Sitra Acher, the other side. Satan gets a place in the Kabbalistic notion of the world. So those are all aspects that are not part of what you know, if we have a chamsa around, is because it's a decorative art piece. It's not because I believe it has any way of keeping demons away. I wouldn't wear a red thread for good luck or to keep the ayin hara, the evil eye, away. I'm trying to, in recent years, I've been very much enamored by the Vilna Gaon and his re-editing of the prayer book. And so I leave out some of the verses or some of the words that were added in as a result of the influence of Kabbalah on the Ashkenazic liturgy. So I have a negative reaction to certain things. So that's where it is there. You know, mysticism, mystical ideas are certainly as old as Judaism. Certainly, the rational vision of the world is not enough to explain the universe, because there is a dead end to rationalism. And so I think the very belief in a caring divinity, I'm using the words this way intentionally, is already a mystical idea. It's only as found in Kabbalah, it's found in other versions of Judaism. I don't find inviting the Maimonidean vision of God. I like to think that when I pray, God listens, and it may be for somehow, some way, it may influence what happens. I don't count on it. I'm not big in reciting Psalms when for somebody who's sick and that sort of thing, thinking that God's going to change things simply because I've recited a Psalm. That's part of traditional Judaism, for that matter, not Kabbalistic. I don't say the Kabbalistic introductions to Kavanot. Okay? So I'm not condemning or denying the beauty of those who do practice it that way. I'm just saying it's not my. So yeah, it's part of Judaism. It's a segment of Judaism. It doesn't appeal to me that much. It certainly does have its highlights that I like. As I said, the idea that the mitzvot have more than simple power. But I don't know if that's just wishful thinking. And I have, and it borders on magic. That's my problem with it. To say that when I bench lulav and etrog, I see it just as truly symbolic. The symbol, we're looking for God's blessings all over the world. It's a symbol. It's a way of praying physically, asking God to bless the world. I don't think it has impact on God. Does God care whether or not I perform the mitzvot? Yes. That's not a rationalistic concept. That doesn't fit into pure rationalism. But yeah, I think God does care. Does he, how the meaning is, I have no theological response to that other than I want it to mean something. And if wanting something, my grandson wants something all the time. So he does things because he wants it. I always ask why, why do you do that? God, why does he do it? He says, why, he asked me why he did something. I don't know why he did. But we do things because we want them to be meaningful. And so whatever gives you meaning to these practices, that's certainly a place to hold it. We didn't talk about Mordechai Kaplan very much when I talked about Jewish philosophy. Mordechai Kaplan is on the opposite end of the spectrum. He's the founder of Reconstructionism. And for Kaplan, God is the power for good in the universe. But that means God is not truly omnipotent. God doesn't care if I do mitzvot. God doesn't answer prayers. God doesn't choose the Jewish people. So for him, Jewish practices, mitzvot, are folkways. It's a folkway. Italians like bocce. Was it bocce bowl? Bocce? Okay. And there's, it's what they do. This is what Jews do. Right? But I don't know that it has, I'm just saying, that's another way of seeing the world. For me, that's a little too far in the other direction. You say. All right. Anybody else have a question or anything?
Just about next class.
Yeah.
So is that our last class? Is next class?
No, let me find my schedule right here. What it is I believe that's.
So there's one more class after our next class. So I was just looking at it earlier today. That's the only reason why I know.
Oh, okay.
I'm not like obsessively watching. So yeah, our exam is on the 9th, which is not next class, but the one after that. And then the 16th was the closing ceremony.
That was supposed to be the closing ceremony. Yeah. Like I say, in years past, that was a barbecue. So we'll,
You could still have a barbecue via Zoom.
maybe, or I don't know if by then we can have a barbecue together. I don't know. I don't think so. Or maybe we can all go to a park somewhere and sit 10 places for everybody else. All right.
What's on the test?
I have a question.
What,
I have a question.
who?
It's Victoria. I have a question. Last time I missed the class, unfortunately. I had work to do. Do you have the recording of that
Yes,
class?
all the classes this year have been recorded.
Can you send them to me? Because I joined late.
Yeah, they're all on YouTube.
On YouTube?
It's on YouTube. Introduction to Judaism. What do I call it?
For you.
Hold on a second. I'll go to my. This class will be put on YouTube tonight or next day or so. Let's see. Where is it? Okay. My home. Where's my where's my thing? Where's my thing? Videos library. That's not right. Yeah. Home. your videos. There we go.
Rabbi, the
Yeah.
name of it is Intro to Judaism, 5,781. So the
Yeah.
Hebrew year.
Yeah.
Victoria,
if
if you go to YouTube and you type in Introduction to Judaism 5781.
Yep.
That Rabbi's photo is there, and it's literally, this is it.
Let me do it now. One
Yeah,
second.
it's
Okay.
Introduction to Judaism 5781.
That includes some classes from the previous year. All the dates are on there when they were done. I think I still have, do I have previous year on here? No. April, March, February. Yeah, yeah, it goes back to October 7th and 8th, 7th, published on the 8th. Okay, can you find
I found Intro to Judaism.
Intro- introduce
Oh,
you?
Victoria, it's Introduction to Judaism.
Or look
and
my, or look at Rob and Mark,
5781.
look me up. Right, I think you can find me on YouTube, then wouldn't that do it? All right.
No, I can't find. I cannot find.
All right.
Victoria, when you're typing it in, are you writing Introduction to Judaism 5781 in the
Yes.
search engine?
Yes.
And what are you having? What's popping up for you when you're, actually, you know what? Victoria, let's take one off of the side. Did you want me to just like text it to you?
Yeah. Can you send me an email? Can you send me an email?
Of course, I can send you an email. I don't know if I have your email address, Rabbi Esther. yet.
I will, I'm gonna send it to Victoria now. Let me get-
Mark and I both just shared the YouTube link in the chat.
You just share it in the chat. Can you find it, Victoria?
Oh, good call, guys. Good call.
Yeah, so that's us troglodytes that don't know how to do things properly.
But Rabbi, I think somebody else was asking about the exam. That's a good question,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah, so what's on the exam and
Everything since the last exam.
you know,
It's just like every other one.
They've all been the same. Nobody's had a hard time with them.
oh, so it's not like
not
one
cumulative.
exam that's for the entire year. It's
No.
okay.
If you would like, I will also send you an exam for the entire year that you can play with. But no,
I thought Kasha asked for that, but I think we're okay.
mm,
No.
no, but what I might do is I might send you all the questions. Look, my exams are easy. You know that. I don't ask because I'm lazy and I don't have to go read your essays and try to figure out what you're really saying and things like that, or try and figure out what you wrote sometimes, you know. So A, B, C, and D is not much easier than that for an exam. Multiple guess works on that. So, but you know, I try. I think you know that I'm looking for the highlights. I'm sure it's clear to you what they are. And if you've taken 2 tests already and done okay on them, it's unlikely that you're going to have a hard time with the last one.
The other question I had is normally if we were doing this in person, would there be any field trips that we would have missed?
Yes.
So
Normally one of the evenings is a trip to the mikveh. We go to the mikveh, we see what it looks like in real life, and we talk about it there and afterwards. I think what I'm going to do is next time I do one is to take some video of it. I have a class, I'm still working on getting it all organized for next end of August. I don't know yet if we're going to meet in person or we're going to be online. You know, the funny thing about it being online is I like being with people. You know, a lot of times you guys don't show your face on it. And so I can't see any reaction from you. Or sometimes I see reactions and I'm not sure I'd like to see. But stop smiling, Adi. But anyway. But this way, though, it's all recorded. I've never tried recording otherwise. And I'll have to see maybe there's a way I can record it without too much problems. I doubt it. I'm not going to invest in getting a video camera for that to schlep around. But Maybe I will, I don't know, see. But this has been very nice. And I've got lots of my resources right here if I'm looking, need something right away. But I miss the in-person. I miss the fact that we can have the field trip or two and have the gathering together at the end. All of those are part and parcel of it. And I think when you are together in a group, you create certain kinds of bonds amongst each other, which is, you can't do this way. You know, I know in years past, there were certain kinds of bonds that were created. People stayed friends with each other for a number of years, maybe after the class was over. Right? So, you know, that's what we have, the reality. Okay. So anything else? I haven't done for years, by the way. Used to be, we used to have a field trip to the grocery store. But you know, and you have to go look for foods and items and stuff for kosher, etc. But it's so easy now at Sobeys. They have several aisles that are only kosher foods. What's the word? You know, that's what we used to do, and people sometimes wonder what we were doing. You know, we will see. Adi says maybe sometime after the lockdown we can come together. We'll see. I will keep it in mind. I won't take an oath to it, but if it does, the opportunity arises and we can, then you will be all invited to that barbecue. Okay. All righty. See everybody next week. Victoria, did you wanted anything? Everything's okay?
Yeah, I found everything and I marked them, so I flagged them. So
Okay.
I'll watch all the videos prior to the exam.
Okay, good. And we will talk. You don't have to take the test next that we're going to have. We'll talk about that. Or we've got a separate thing that we have to work on. Okay.
Okay, so maybe I'll book a meeting, Rabbi.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll book a meeting after the exam. I'll book a meeting with you.
Okay, sounds good. All right. All right, everybody. Enjoy your weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
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 Cheers.